Hello everyone, my name is Ben, and this is the UnchartedX podcast. This is episode number 4. This is going to be quite a long one. This is a Q&A session with Graham Hancock, the one and only Graham Hancock. I recorded this back in 2013 while we were traipsing around the Andean region of South America through Peru and Bolivia on a group trip. I'll give you a little bit of the background to this trip and how I came to find myself recording Graham holding a Q&A session while on a lengthy bus trip riding over the Andes. So I had originally gotten into the entire, ancient history and the ancient civilization genre, if you like, thanks to Graham Hancock, as I think many people have. I was aware of his work, Fingerprints of the Gods, just an excellent book. I think that came out in 1995, and then it wasn't until really his first appearance on the Rogan Experience podcast, I'm not sure exactly when that was, it might have been 2010 or thereabouts, that I really started really avidly following his work. And I was following him on Twitter, and he said at one point, where there's an opportunity come up to go and travel with him on a research trip. He was actually researching material for what ended up being Magicians of the Gods, which was the follow-up to Fingerprints, and said, if anyone's interested in coming along, go and register here and get on board. And I immediately went and did so. And it turned out to be quite a good decision. Brian Forrester, some of you may know his name as well. He was also on that trip. In fact, it was something put together by Graham and Brian at the time. So we ended up down in South America for 2 and a bit weeks with a group of about 25 other people, along with Graham, his lovely wife Santha, and then also Brian. And it was just a fantastic experience. Part of this, Graham held a couple of lectures, did that type of thing, but getting around in that area takes some time. And I think we were driving over the Andean Pass heading towards Bolivia, and it was a few hours in a bus ride. And Graham said, well, let's use some of this time and do a Q&A. So the audio that you'll hear it wasn't high quality recording gear. I used my cell phone, just basically held it up to the bus speaker. He was using a microphone, and a lot of the questions were asked by essentially the other members on the tour. I did ask a couple of the questions that are in there, but in this recording I will sort of read out the question before we get to Graham's response, and it's going to be quite a lengthy one. In fact, this is the sum total of 2 videos that are on my YouTube channel. If you want to go and see some of this same Q&A, in this case put to a lot of the footage that I have from that area, then you can check that out on my YouTube channel. All of my videos are, as always, hosted on my website, which is UnchartedX.com. So I hope you enjoy. The first question here to Graham is, what is his history as an author? And also goes on to ask why the scientific establishment sort of continues to ignore the evidence that he presents in his work and across all of his books.
Books are science fiction. But look, my critics say that all of my factual books are fiction anyway. Okay, so you're asking how could they dispute the facts that I present? There's 2 issues here. Firstly, I do also write fiction, real fiction. I write novels. This has been something that as a matter of fact, it began with. I'll answer your question in full, but let me dwell on this for a moment. It began in 2007 with a series of ayahuasca sessions. I was given a story in visions, and that story was about 2 young women, one of them living 24,000 years ago in the past, and one of them living in modern Los Angeles. And they are brought together by a supernatural being, by a ferocious angel of sorts, to do battle with a demon who travels through time. I was given this whole story as a novel by Mother Ayahuasca. and I was told to go away and write it. And that was the beginning of my novel writing career. And I produced a book called Entangled. And there's still a second volume of Entangled to come. And I have also produced the first volume of a 3-volume series of novels called War God, about the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Now these are definitely novels. They're fiction. Entangled is entirely fiction, but I draw on my knowledge of the Stone Age and my own experiences of spirit worlds to write that novel. And War God, the book about the Spanish conquest of Mexico, is based on historical facts, but it includes many fictional characters, and it is fictionalized, and it's a true novel, it's a proper novel, but I'm using the historical background as the framework for it. Now, that's my fiction. My non-fiction is what I'm better known for, and that goes, I've been writing non-fiction books for many years. My first non-fiction book was in fact a travel book called Journey Through Pakistan, and it was published in 1981 when I was 31 years old. And during the 1980s I wrote a number of other non-fiction books. I wrote a book about AIDS, called AIDS, the Deadly Epidemic, that was published in 1986, quite early on in the story of AIDS. I wrote a book about foreign aid called Lords of Poverty, which was highly critical and quite a controversial book about foreign aid. But during the 1980s I was first confronted by the historical mystery of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, and that led me to write my first non-fiction book about a historical mystery. And I was not much criticized by academics for writing The Sign and the Seal. The book did moderately well. It got to number 6 on the bestseller list in the UK. It was fairly widely published in other languages, but it wasn't extremely prominent. Then I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, which is the book for which I'm best known, and which argues the case for a lost civilization, destroyed in a global cataclysm more than 12,000 years ago. What I thought I was doing in that book was offering an alternative point of view. As I got drawn into the field of historical mystery, I discovered, of course, that there were certain academics who claimed the field of history and prehistory as their own. These are historians and archaeologists, in principle. They claim to be the experts who tell us the story of our past. But often the facts on which they base their story are very thin. See, you can write quite accurate history about the 16th century because there is an awful lot of documentary material that has come down from the 16th century. So you can really be pretty sure that what you're saying is factual. But when you go back before 5,000 years ago, you don't have any documents. There are no written documents that have come down. There's just whatever you can dig out of the ground and your interpretation of it. And I felt very strongly, as we went even further back, beyond 5,000 years, back to 10, 12, 15,000 years ago in the past, that the evidence on which archaeologists and historians were basing their conclusions was so flimsy and so thin that it supported another interpretation, that it was just possible that their whole interpretation of the story of the human past was wrong, and that they were missing a major part of the human story. And this was drawn to my attention by many things: by the survival of ancient maps that show the world as it looked during the last ice age, by global myths of a golden age, of civilizing heroes, of global cataclysms, of the Great Flood. There are more than 2,000 floods. I began to wonder, could these things which are just dismissed either as anomalies or as fantasies by the academics, could they actually be true? Could there be another way to read the story of our past from the same fragmentary evidence that they draw their conclusions from? So I thought that I was simply giving an alternative point of view, and that they would welcome it. Ha! What a foolish thought. They didn't welcome it at all. I was subjected to the most bitter and vicious attacks from the moment that I published Fingerprints of the Gods. And you see, the reason for this was not just that I was saying, as they saw it, that they were wrong, but also the terrible sin I committed was my book was a success. Fingerprints of the Gods sold 5 million copies. It was #1 bestseller in 6 countries. It was a huge and phenomenal bestseller. It became very prominent. So they could ignore me when I wrote The Sign of the Seal, but they couldn't ignore me when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, and when television started to pick it up, and there were, lots and lots of shows about it, and then students in their classes were asking them questions and saying, well, what do you think about this? And suddenly it became very annoying to them. So what they then did was to attack me and to recruit their friends in the media to make shows attacking me, to try not to really argue or debate the issues, but to destroy me as an individual. I felt a bit bitter about this at the time, but then I discovered that that's what academics do to each other as well. They're like a team of attack dogs. Anybody puts up an idea that challenges somebody else's territory, they will literally destroy that man or woman if they can. They'll stamp them into the earth so that they never rise again. There's a ferocious system at work in academia. So I think that fundamentally, when you challenge a reference frame, when you challenge a paradigm in which thousands of highly educated individuals have invested their careers, you can expect to be attacked if your ideas become prominent. Don't bother if your ideas don't become prominent, but if they become prominent, you will be attacked. And I realize that comes with the territory. And as the years have gone by, I've come to accept that it comes with the territory. And you know what? It's made me improve my game. I think that this business of attacking a new idea has some merits, because it forces that idea to be tested. It forces that idea to be stood up. If the idea is fundamentally weak, that attack system will get rid of it and expose its weaknesses and bring it down. And I think that is healthy. It means that only ideas that have some merit can survive this firestorm of attack. But I would say, however, that the method of destructive criticism that academics use also has its downsides. For example, what's wrong with looking for what's good in a new idea rather than looking for what's bad? Maybe there are problems with this or that new idea. Maybe it isn't completely right, but maybe there's something in it that's good. Why don't we have a new system of academic challenging which actually tries to say, well, here's an idea that challenges what we think, but maybe let's find something good in it and see if we can expand human knowledge in that way. I think it taught me a lot about the way that the academic system works. I'm pleased after 20 years that these ideas are still in circulation, that they have not been destroyed. I'm pleased after 20 years that a new generation is picking up these ideas and running with them, and individuals are doing their own research and finding their own way to the conclusion that we are not getting the whole story about human prehistory. And I'm pleased that new evidence is coming up, such as Gobekli Tepe, such as Gunung Padang in Indonesia, such as the whole issue of this gigantic comet that hit the Earth 12,890 years ago. All of this is new evidence which supports the case that human civilization may be far older than we think. Like one of the magazines that attacked me a lot in the past, New Scientist, just published a story a few days ago, front cover, guess what, human civilization much older than we realized. So I think that I think it's been a hard run. I've taken some knocks, but these ideas are still there, and I think they still have mileage, and I think we are going to learn more about the past of the human story. And I think my role has been to challenge an entrenched dogma and to continue to do so. Okay.
This next question is basically a simple one. It is, are we looking at the work of aliens? And just a quick note here that the audio is a little poor at the beginning of this question, but it does improve after a few minutes.
if I were to find a titanium engine in a 20,000-year-old stratum, then I might need to invoke aliens as a way to explain it. But up till now, I've not been presented with any single object or device which requires the level of technology to cross interstellar space. So I think the best explanation is a lost human civilization. Now, as I say, this is a complex question. What about UFOs and it's quote-unquote alien abductions? What I tried to show in my book, Supernatural, is that the phenomenon we call UFOs today and the phenomenon that we call alien abductions today has been experienced by our predecessors on Earth. And is still being experienced and interpreted in different ways around the Earth. For example, there are astonishing similarities at the level of phenomenology between fairies, the entities that were called fairies in medieval times, the entities that shamans in the Amazon jungle call spirits today, and the entities that we in the West and the technological world are presently construing as aliens with the ability to cross interstellar space and abduct us. Shamans also experience abductions. People in the middle by spirits. People in the Middle Ages were abducted by fairies. I think that these are all one phenomenon, just being viewed through different cultural spectacles. And one of the talks that I would give will go in depth into the evidence for this reasoning. But is that phenomenon? I think that we tend to jump to we are a culture in the last century that has begun to explore space. Really, in the last 60 years, we've sent rockets to the moon. We've even landed men on the moon. We naturally are thinking in terms of space travel and space exploration. So when we face a mysterious phenomenon which involves aerial flight and beings that look different from us, we jump to the conclusion that it is aliens. But I think that actually what we have here is an unsolved mystery, and I think that that's a knee-jerk reaction. My own personal feeling is that the phenomenon is much more mysterious than just physical aliens coming here in interstellar ships. I would say, if I were to put money on it, I would say we're dealing with an interdimensional phenomenon here. I would say that's what the UFO is, that it's a vehicle for crossing between dimensions rather than a vehicle for crossing vast distances within this dimension. And that might explain the bizarre nature of certain abduction experiences and the elusiveness of the UFO phenomenon, that it does indeed leave physical traces, but that it's extremely elusive. And the last point on this is visionary experiences. I have encountered entities in ayahuasca and DMT visions that I could easily construe as aliens. More than 50% of Rick Strassman's volunteers, who definitely weren't abducted physically, had the experience that is identical to alien abductions. So if we're going to solve this alien problem, I think we need to do at least as much inner journeying as outward journeying. And I think the answers lie within, in our consciousness, just as much as they lie out there. And let's remember that our ancestors back into prehistoric times were also having visionary experiences and encountering the kind of entities that we encounter in psilocybin or DMT or ayahuasca altered states of consciousness. I hope that answers your question.
The next question for Graham is, in your opinion, what and where is the evidence of the oldest cities in the world?
The oldest cities. The question is, what in my opinion, in my experience, is the evidence for the oldest cities on Earth? I would have to say that at the moment, bearing in mind that the next turn of the archaeologist's spade may reveal new evidence, or the next diving expedition may reveal new evidence, I would have to say that the evidence for the earliest true large-scale settlements is in Turkey and in Sumer, ancient Mesopotamia, and in ancient India, particularly northwest India, where we have the remains of the Indus Valley civilization. There's a site called Mehrgarh which goes back from the earliest part of the Indus Valley civilization that goes back to 8,000 BC. Çatalhöyük in Turkey goes back 9,500 BC. And underwater in the Gulf of Cambay, between Pakistan and India, have been identified by sonar survey the traces of two very large cities, 9 or 10 kilometers in length, along the banks of ancient river systems, which by the depth of their submergence could indeed be as much as 12,000 or more years old. Before that date, I don't find any evidence for large cities. But let us remember that if we're speaking of a lost civilization, we're speaking of a truly gigantic global cataclysm. When you have ice caps that are 2 to 3 miles deep, sitting on top of North America and north of Europe, you must understand that everything under that ice cap has been ground to powder. That ice cap is on the move, it's glaciers, and it's just grinding to dust under a vast, unbelievable weight, anything that lies underneath it. And at the same time, when those ice caps were formed, the water came out of the oceans and sea level dropped by 400 feet. So I think the place that we should be looking, and indeed I am looking, for the remains of more lost cities, the cities of a lost civilization, is first and foremost under the water, when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, under the sands of the Sahara Desert, because the Sahara Desert was green during the last ice age, and interestingly in the Amazon jungle as well. The Amazon jungle had a very different ecology during the last ice age, and as I mentioned the other night, traces of huge earthworks are emerging from the Amazon jungle. So I think that because archaeologists have a mindset that there could have been no cities before 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, they're actually not interested in looking for cities in those areas. And I found this particularly true with the 7 years of scuba diving research that Santa and I did. Again and again I was frustrated by marine archaeologists whose sole interest was in shipwrecks. They saw no point in exploring for submerged remains underwater, but we did find submerged remains, for example, off the southeast coast of India, going down to depths of more than 120 feet underwater. So I think that more ancient cities will be found. We just have to look in the right place.
The next question for Graham is there a lost civilization under the ice of Antarctica?
Yes. Okay, the question is, do I believe that there's some lost civilization under the Antarctic ice? Yes, I think it's an intriguing possibility. I explored that possibility in Fingerprints of the Gods. As far as I know, the earliest researcher to make the suggestion that Antarctica was Atlantis was a gentleman named Flavio Barbiero, who wrote a book called A Civilization Under the Ice in Italian in 1973. Later on we have Rand and Rose Flemath in the 1990s, who proposed that Antarctica was Atlantis, and both researchers, both Flavio Barbiero and the Flemaths, draw on the work of Charles Hapgood, and as indeed I did myself, and the notion of Earth crust displacement, that Antarctica was not always where it is now. Something that weakens this case is ice cores from Antarctica, which show ice has been in place there for 20 million years, but not in all parts of Antarctica. The Antarctic Peninsula may well have been in a warmer zone at one time in the past, and more work needs to be done. What I find frustrating about Antarctica, and why I personally have not done any further work on it, is because I can't research it myself. I don't have the technology to explore beneath the ice, and there's a lot of secrecy surrounding the research stations that various nations have in Antarctica. For all I know, cities may already have been found, but whether they would be announced is another matter. So I think Antarctica is an interesting candidate. I think it's interesting that it appears on so many ancient maps that some definite effort was made to map the changing contours of Antarctica during the story of the Ice Age. But when I consider the possibility of a lost civilization, I believe we're dealing with a global civilization, truly global, that was maritime in nature, that lived along coastlines, that communicated by sea, and that suffered cataclysmic destruction in the great floods and the cometary impact at the end of the last ice age. Yeah.
The next question is, what are Graham's thoughts on the role of giants throughout history?
The question is, what are my thoughts on giants on Earth at certain periods of time? As a matter of fact, when I started work on Fingerprints of the Gods, the original title that I had for Fingerprints of the Gods, before I changed it to Fingerprints of the Gods, was There Were Giants Then. And that comes from Genesis 6, chapter 6, verse 6. There were giants in the earth in those days, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men and bare children by them. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of testimony of giants living around the world, physical giants. But when I was considering that as a title of Fingerprints of the Gods, I was thinking more in terms of intellectual giants, that there were intellectual giants in the past, the founders of a great global civilization. I have no objection to the notion of physical giants, and a few intriguing artifacts have been found. My friend Robert Schock has reported that he's found giant femurs on Easter Island on recent expeditions there. And there are very recent traditions of giants on Easter Island. The Dutch themselves reported walking between the legs of the inhabitants of Easter Island when they first encountered them. So, we have to consider this possibility. We know that human stature can vary enormously within the genus Homo, that there are many subspecies. We are Homo sapiens. There was Homo neanderthalensis. Neanderthals had slightly bigger brains than us. They were quite massive and chunky. There's Homo floriensis from the island of Flores in Indonesia, who's a tiny creature, barely 3 feet high. Seems to have coexisted with anatomically modern human beings. So why shouldn't very large human beings, races of very large human beings, have existed? Could they have been 20 or 30 feet tall? I don't think so. But perhaps 8 to 10 feet tall, yes, possible. Very, very, very possible. And I believe that we should take all myth seriously, because that is the memory of our species from a time when we lost our memory. And until we definitively disprove what myth is telling us, I think we should keep our minds open. Okay.
The next question here is kind of a multi-part question, and it goes along the lines of, assuming that there was an ancient global civilization, does he think that there were different cultures within that civilization? And then to follow on with that, it is, can Graham address the gaps that we see in the fossil record?
First part of question. Global civilization, is it possible that there were different cultures within that civilization? Yeah. Second part, you want me to address the issue of the fossil record?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll address the issue of the fossil record first. And I can only report the conclusions so far of anthropologists during the last 50 years or so. And it is the consensus of anthropology that the earliest anatomically modern human skeleton so far found, in other words, a creature looking just like all of us in this bus, date back 195,000 years ago. Now that is actually a fact. No other anatomically modern skeleton of an older date has been found yet. It doesn't mean that it won't be found. That's what we found so far. And if you go back before that date, you find a pretty clear evolutionary trend towards anatomically modern humans. It's interesting that even earlier than that, 300,000, 350,000 years ago, Neanderthal man is present on the planet and makes himself the master of Europe. Neanderthals had been running Europe for 300,000 years before anatomically modern humans came into Europe. And again, The problem with the fossil record is that it's so sketchy that we only have, fragments, that we don't know what's been lost. Whole species of man could have existed, and their remains could simply never have been found. They could have been ground to dust, wiped out, lost forever, and we just wouldn't know that they existed. But right now, the fossil record says the oldest anatomically modern human skeleton is 195,000 years old, and it comes from Africa. That skeleton happens to come from Ethiopia. But I personally go with the notion of out of Africa. I think humanity did originate, our species did originate in Africa, and I think there was a diaspora out of Africa, and in some cases that diaspora was very early. Anatomically modern humans were likely present in Australia by 70,000 years ago, which is an astonishing achievement if you think of it. And anatomically modern humans reached Europe 50,000 years ago or so. Would they have been the founders of that global civilization? Yes, I have to assume so. I have to assume that the same people, the same genotype, that left us the cave paintings, also diverged in another way and produced a civilization. It's not so surprising that we have hunter-gatherers and a high civilization coexisting on the earth at the same time 50,000 years ago, because we have that now. We have hunter-gatherers in the Amazon jungle, we have them in Botswana, coexisting on the earth with high civilization. We have hunter-gatherers in the Amazon jungle who don't even know that we exist. They're still not contacted. So I don't see why that shouldn't have been the case in the past. And there might well have been some interchange between the two different levels or types of social organization. Now, your other question was cultural variation within this global civilization. Yes, I think there would have been regional differences, but what I see is a universal language, for me, one of the strongest pieces of evidence of a lost civilization are certain universal spiritual ideas, which are found all around the world, and which are related to certain types of structures, to pyramids, to the stars, and to what I call a science of immortality, a very specific set of ideas relating to how one must live one's life in order to gain what the ancient Egyptians called the life of millions of years. These ideas are universal. They're found amongst the Maya. They're found in ancient India. They're found indeed in South America. They're found amongst the Egyptians. And I think that the best explanation for them is a remote common ancestor that passed down these ideas all around the world. I don't think they were individually invented, because there's too much in common.
The next question gets to some of the secret societies around the world. This is kind of interesting because I know Randall Carlson is actually Freemason, but this addresses, essentially Templars or Freemasons, and are they withholding information from the general public?
Have information that they're withholding from us? Or?
Yes, I think they do. I think secret societies are one of the intriguing ways to go back to the time of a lost civilization. It's very interesting that societies like the Hung League in China and the Freemasons in the West have identical rituals and identical ideas about the past. I think that my own view is there was a global cataclysm around about 12,900 years ago, that it wiped out a great civilization of the past, that there were survivors, and that they worked very hard to preserve and transmit the knowledge to the future. And I think that some secret societies may extend in their roots all the way back to that time. And I think that they focused on certain areas, and one of those areas was certainly the Andes, and another area was certainly ancient Egypt, and another area was China. And the ideas got changed a little bit as time went by, but there's a kind of universal symbolism that connects all of these secret societies. So I think that they're an important conduit for further research into the origins of a lost civilization.
Next question here is, how do you think that the first organic matter, or life in itself, came to be on our planet?
Interesting question. So the question is, how do I think the very first organic matter was introduced on this planet? Well, that's, one of the great mysteries, as a matter of fact. It's interesting that both Sir Fred Hoyle, the astrophysicist Sir Fred Hoyle, and Francis Crick, the discoverer of the double helix form of DNA, both of them did not believe that DNA had evolved here on Earth. The notion that we are given at the moment is that there was some kind of primeval soup. Who's this for? Oh, for me. Thank you. Thank you. That there was some kind of... So, okay, the Earth forms about 4.5 billion years ago. I'm just going to drink this, actually. Some organic matter here. Being an organic creature myself. The Earth forms about 4.5 billion years ago. By 3.9 billion years ago, it is cool enough to support life. By 3.8 billion years ago, it's covered in bacterial life. That emergence of bacterial life on the Earth took place within just 100 million years, which is a very short time in the geological history of the Earth. And both Francis Crick and Sir Fred Hoyle said that you would be more likely to get a fully functioning and flying Boeing jet bypassing a hurricane through a junkyard than you would be to get DNA from accidental collisions of molecules in any kind of primeval soup. They just didn't believe that there was time for these molecules to develop. So, in the case of Sir Fred Hoyle, he believed in a phenomenon called panspermia, that the molecules of life were brought here on comets and bombarded the early Earth, happened to hit the early Earth around that time, and manifested into life, which then began to evolve here. And Francis Crick took it further, and he suggested that another civilization far away across the galaxy, facing certain annihilation as a result of a nearby supernova explosion, for example, their first thought would have been to get themselves off their planet. When they found that they couldn't do that, or they could not preserve themselves across the vast distances of interstellar space, they decided to preserve the essence of life instead. And so they genetically engineered bacteria, packed them into cryogenic chambers in the nose cones of rockets, interstellar rockets, and fired them off in all directions. And around 3,900 million years ago, one of those rockets hit the early Earth and spilled out its cargo of bacteria, which then began to evolve. So these are two intriguing suggestions, but the mainstream suggestion is simply that by accidental collisions of molecules in the primeval soup, that the DNA-RNA system gets started and then begins to evolve into life as we recognize it today. Now, it may be the case that I believe the universe is a magical place. I believe it's imbued with spirit, and that its whole purpose is to manifest life. So it may be the case that on any suitable planet, when conditions become right, life begins to manifest. I am a believer in evolution. I do think that evolution occurs, and I think that it's a kind of crazy idea to say that evolution does not occur. Even if you're a believer in God, I see no problem in the notion of evolution, because any God with even a small amount of intelligence would surely use evolution as a process in his or her creation. If you don't have life that is capable of evolving, that life can be wiped out by any cosmic accident, completely destroyed. But if you have the capacity for evolution, then life can bounce back around a cataclysm. It can take a new form. It can jump and jive and develop and change and adjust to environmental circumstances. So I think the notion of evolution is a very good one, and I think it clearly does happen. But it doesn't rule out mystery, because evolution is a central process of any life form in my view. But the mystery of how life begins still remains in place. And fundamentally, for me, I think the spirit world created the physical world. Not God, not aliens, but non-physical consciousness created a physical universe in which to manifest in three-dimensional form. That's my own guesswork on this great mystery, but none of us will ever have an answer to it in this life. Maybe when we pass beyond the veil of death, all will be revealed.
What are your thoughts on prophets?
My thoughts on prophets. Well, once you get deeply into the issue of altered states of consciousness, and understand that consciousness is not tied to the body, and that consciousness can step outside of space and time, and in so doing can travel vast physical distances in an instant, consciousness, not matter, then you also understand that consciousness can transit time, because time is a phenomenon of the material realm. So once you are able to leave the body as consciousness, then all time and all space is available to you, and therefore prophecy becomes possible. It becomes possible to enter the future or to enter the past. It becomes possible, even more intriguing, to change the past from the future. Yes, I think prophecy is one of those faculties of the human creature which we were gifted with by the universe, but which modern society has suppressed, because we in modern society think of everything in terms of technology and matter, and we don't think in terms of spirit and consciousness, and not enough. So yeah, I'm very open to the idea of prophecy.
This next one is a good question. It's something that I've addressed in several of my videos, but it is, what can you tell us about any unexplored passages inside the Great Pyramid of Giza?
Yeah, so the first question is to do with the rumors. In fact, it's much more than rumors of explored and unexplored tunnels within the Great Pyramid. As a matter of fact, this goes back to 1993. First of all, know about the Great Pyramid that in the two main chambers, the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, each of them has in its north wall and its south wall an opening. And that opening is about 8 inches high and 8 inches wide. It's a narrow opening. Obviously, a human being cannot get into it. Now, we know that the openings in the King's Chamber cut up all the way through the body of the pyramid and emerge on the outside of the pyramid. That's been known since the 19th century because cannonballs were rolled down those shafts and they turned up in the King's Chamber. They were rolled down from outside. It wasn't until 1872 that the north and south shafts of the Queen's Chamber were discovered, because their openings within the Queen's Chamber were sealed by a layer of stone about 3 inches thick. But a British Freemason called Wayman Dixon, noticing that there were shafts in the King's Chamber, went around the Queen's Chamber with a hammer tapping on the walls, and he found 2 hollow points, and he cut through them and found that they led to chambers which slope up at specific angles into the body of the pyramid. Those 2 shafts, did I say chambers? I meant shafts. Those 2 shafts do not exit on the outside of the pyramid, unlike the King's Chamber shafts. They go somewhere inside the Great Pyramid. In 1993, the German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink was asked to clean the shafts of the King's Chamber, and he devised a robot that could do that. While he was at it, he thought, why don't I check out the Queen's Chamber shafts? He didn't have permission to do that from the Egyptian government, but he had sole access to the pyramid, so he sent his robot, which was called Upuaut, the opener of the ways. He sent his robot up the shafts of the Queen's Chamber, and he discovered at the end of those shafts, about 165 feet up them, in both the north and the south shaft a door with metal handles, and the metal handles appear to be some kind of copper. At that point, Zahi Hawass, the pharaoh of the pyramids, discovered what Rudolf was doing, cancelled all his research, and banned him from Egypt. And the project stopped for several years. It stopped because Zahi can't bear anybody else making discoveries in Egypt. They all have to be made by him. So he commissioned the University of Singapore to make a new robot, and National Geographic, Zahi Hawass is paid $200,000 a year by National Geographic to be one of their consultants. National Geographic got involved, and when they made a new robot, they went up those shafts again, and they drilled a hole through the shafts. What they discovered on the other side of the hole was a cavity and then another door, and their technology was not sufficient to drill through the second door. So we don't know yet what lies behind those shafts, and the whole situation of turmoil in Egypt, as far as I'm aware, is preventing further research. Of course, I can't rule out that the research has been done and that we've not been told about it. One thing seems pretty obvious to me. If you can have a large chamber at the bottom of those shafts, i.e. the Queen's Chamber, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a large chamber at the top of those shafts as well. And I suspect that there are many other cavities and shafts within the Great Pyramid and beneath the Great Pyramid. I think that there's a labyrinth of tunnels connecting the structures of the Great Pyramid, and ground-penetrating radar has rather confirmed that there's a chamber beneath the Sphinx, that there's tunnels running from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. But all of this remains to be brought fully into the public domain, which it has not been yet. I hope that answers your question. Yes.
This next topic is always something I enjoy hearing Graham speak about, and the question is, what does he think about the future of our own so-called Western civilization?
I think we need to be very careful, because in mythological terms there's no doubt that we look like the next lost civilization. We're doing everything wrong. We are arrogant. We are materialistic to the extreme. We've created a technological monstrosity that denies spirit and that seeks to destroy any attempt to recognize spirit. We have utter disrespect for this beautiful planet that we've been presented by the universe with. We are like a parasitical growth that consumes and destroys everything of beauty and wonder upon this planet. And all of the ancient myths say that when civilizations take that route of arrogance and cruelty, my God, what a cruel civilization we are. We are aware of terrible things happening to other human beings around the planet. We're aware of global starvation. We're aware that the Amazon jungle is being just cut to shreds, and we don't do anything about it. You know, when a civilization so far transgresses the laws of the universe, it can expect retribution. And that's why I'm encouraged by a sign of awakening consciousness all around the world, by people who are taking their sovereignty into their own hands and refusing to be dictated to by large corporations and big states that are pulling us along this destructive path. And I see that we can turn around. The choice is in our hands. We don't have to step off the edge of the abyss. And I see a correction underway right now, at the 11th hour, perhaps just in time, with the awakening of youth all around the planet, and a desire and a rejection of materialism, and a desire to find another way to do things. And I remain hopeful that we will find that way, and that we will not make the mistake of our ancestors, and that we will not become the next lost civilization. Thank you. Yeah.
Along the same lines as the last question, this one is, what are Graham's thoughts on state intervention or on mass surveillance and the general intrusion of the control systems that are thrust into our everyday lives?
Yeah, so the question is this whole issue of government close monitoring and surveillance of sovereign individuals. throughout the world, and an attempt to impose this dead hand of control upon us. Again, I will address this at greater length in one of my talks, where I go into the Gnostic system of ideas and the notion of archons who seek to mislead mankind. But I am personally horrified by the level of state intervention and state control, by the fact that the state feels that it has the right to investigate and inquire into every intimate detail of our personal lives, as though the individual has ceased to exist, that we are all just cogs in a wheel. This is a monstrous situation that's being created, and they're very clever. They use our money, raised through taxes, to create mind control programs, to persuade us that it's in our own interests to hand over all of our sovereignty to them. This is why I think the war on drugs is a war on consciousness, and why it's extremely important that if we take that step, reclaim our sovereignty on the right as adults to make sovereign decisions about our own consciousness at the level of altered state of consciousness, I think it will have a rolling effect on the rest of what happens in society. And again, I see people waking up and resisting this. And I'm pleased to say that in America, which is leading the world in terms of surveillance, it is also leading the world in terms of resistance. This is one of the great things about America, this spirit of independence and just the refusal to accept this being under the thumb of government. And we can see it in other ways around the world, even in the phenomenon of the Arab Spring and so on and so forth, that people are resisting these controlling forces. So we live in a time of flux, when negative forces are bearing down on us, and a new spirit of resistance is emerging. I think personally that we have come to the end of the time of the big state, and we've come to the end of the time of the big corporation, and we've come to the end of the time of the big centrally organized religion. They've had their day. They're desperately trying to cling on. They're desperately trying to impose their model upon us. They're spreading fear and hatred and suspicion to drive us all mad so that we feel we need them and must depend on them. But more and more people are just utterly refusing to put up with that bullshit any longer. And I take hope in that. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take this question back here first. Yes, yeah.
This next topic is straying towards Graham's work around consciousness and psychedelics. And the question is, do you think there is a relationship between the geometric patterns encountered when using DMT, or with Terence McKenna's concept of a universal mind lattice?
Yeah, so let me see if I can summarize your question. Now that planets have been observed to circle virtually every star that we've discovered, and that certain geometrical patterns and relationships have been observed there and here, what are my thoughts about the geometrical experiences encountered in the DMT altered state of consciousness and Terence McKenna's idea of a universal mind lattice? Sometimes I think when I smoke DMT that I'm entering into the control panel that manifests all of this. You know, all of this is energy. All this physical stuff that we call matter, it's all energy. It's all buzzing and in movement. We think we're solid, but actually you get down to the molecular level, you get down to the atomic level, and we're just gaps. We're just space. You know, I can touch this and rest my hand on it, but if I were vibrating at a different level, my hand would pass right through it. And it somehow seems to be the case that this system that we call geometry, that the Greeks certainly were not the first to explore geometry. They're attributed with so doing, but the ancient Egyptians were doing so long before them. I mean, geometry means earth measuring, actually. That's what geometry means. This system of interconnected lattices that is involved in it is fundamental to the DMT experience, and it's fundamental, I think, to the nature of reality. And I think what DMT is doing is allowing us to peer beyond the veil into the fundamental generative nature of reality. that we live in, and I think that's why the authorities are so afraid of it, because they don't want us to know the truth about reality.
The next question here is one that gets after one of my favourite topics, which is our general perspective when viewing the past. And the question is, how do we widen our reference frame for viewing the past?
It's the case that for a very long while, men, and they were mainly men in the society of that time of high intelligence, had a reference frame which told them that the sun revolved around the earth. And that reference frame, it was so deeply held that they didn't realize it was a reference frame. They thought it was a fact. And it seemed obvious to them that it was a fact. Just look up and you can see the sun rising above the earth and going round the earth and coming down on the other side. It seemed incredibly crazy to suggest that the earth was going around the sun. Obviously the earth was fixed and still, and everything else was revolving around it. And this reference frame survived for hundreds, thousands of years. It just went on and on and on. It's called the Ptolemaic System. And as a matter of fact, if you disputed this reference frame, you could be killed. You could actually be burnt at the stake. Not just have your character assassinated by gangs of furious academics, they would actually tie you to a stake and burn you to death for suggesting that reference frame was wrong. But you know what? The reference frame was totally wrong. It was childishly stupid, but it survived for a very long time. And it may be the same with the reference frames that our society uses today. So the first thing that comes to mind on this is that if our society were wise, it would deploy at least a percentage of the massive resources that are devoted to science. It would set aside a serious chunk of resources to the serious exploration of extraordinary ideas. However much those ideas might seem to go against the reference frame, we're wealthy enough to set aside a certain fund to just consider the possibility those ideas might be right. Because my God, if they are right, they change everything. And isn't it worth putting just a tiny percentage of the vast trillions of dollars that are spent on warfare and research and development into weapons and mainstream science into exploring the extraordinary and the impossible? That would be one of the wisest acts, I think, that an advanced civilization could undertake. Secondly, on the matter of reference frames, the issue of peer review, which you were also discussing. Peer review is a rigorous system of inquiry into the merit of ideas. This is precisely the point that academics make about what they call fringe ideas and extraordinary ideas, that they are not subject to peer review, and that therefore they cannot be taken seriously. The trouble with that is that peer review is also a reference frame. And if you go in with ideas about telepathy or ideas about lost civilization, the peer review process will throw them out right at the first step. It won't even go down the road of inquiring into them, because it says these ideas are obviously impossible. Just as it was obviously impossible that the Earth revolved around the sun, you know. And this is the problem that we face. So to enter a new system where, and we need to talk about funding here. Funding is important. Mainstream science and particular kinds of mainstream science get a lot of funding. We need to find a way to channel funding into supporting the exploration of extraordinary and ridiculous ideas, which may seem ridiculous. And remember, I think everybody's familiar with that wonderful quote from Einstein. If at first an idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it. It's the absurd ideas that actually move us forward. So instead of seeking to destroy them, we should at least channel a small amount of funding into nurturing and supporting them, to see where they go, checking them out rigorously, giving them the chance to go through a peer review process, rather than dismissing them because they don't fit the reference frame. And I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know whether, we need the help of some philanthropic billionaires who are prepared to put resources into this, or whether I don't believe that we'll find any wise government that would be prepared to do that. I don't know where the funding will come from. And in the meantime, well, what do we have? We have the internet, and we have the global sharing of ideas. And yes, no doubt, there's a lot of nonsense out there, but there's also some incredibly exciting thoughts which are being entertained and explored perhaps for the first time in human history. So again, as with the issue of consciousness, I'm fundamentally optimistic. We've entered a new phase. What the internet means is that the power of the big media and the power of the big institutions is being whittled down. It's being broken. We don't have to rely on them as the gatekeepers for ideas that may reach the public anymore.
And we've got TED, Graham.
Huh?
And we've got TED.
And we've got TED, yes. That was such a surprise to me. I used to love TED Talks, and I thought they were the last people who would do something like that. But it taught me that, again, that rigid materialist reference frame, which will not consider the idea of non-local consciousness, isn't work even in an institution like TED. And in a way, by banning me and by banning Rupert Sheldrake, they did us all a great favor, because they woke a lot of people up to what is going on behind the scenes, and how ideas are subject to these arbitrary filters based not on facts, not on evidence, but actually on ideology and prejudice. Yeah. They've got nowhere to go. I mean, TED, and the thing about TED is it lives on the internet, and they were exposed massively on the internet as not at all being what they presented themselves to the public as. So I think it was a very good development in the awakening of consciousness.
Next question here, dealing again with the ancient lost civilization, and it is, do you think that telepathy was involved with the lost civilization and its structures that are in place all around the world?
Well, what I'm being asked is, at the time of the lost civilization, with structures all around the world, do I think that telepathy was involved? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. I think telepathy, telekinesis, and other psychic faculties are innate human abilities. And I think that they were elevated to a very high level in remote prehistory. And I think that one of the things that has happened to us when we became a species with amnesia, when we lost our memory about the past, is that we lost our connection with those faculties. And that's why our society, throughout the whole span of the last 2,000 to 3,000 years at least, has focused on mechanical advantage and on technological, physical, material solutions to physical and material challenges. I think in earlier times it was psychic faculties that were used to deal with those challenges, including the challenge of communicating across long distances. We're getting very close now to telepathy with the internet. We've got there by mechanical means, in a way, but I think we don't need that physical structure. I think we can do it. Everybody's had the experience of the phone ringing and knowing who's on the other end. Everybody's had the experience of precognition. Everybody's had the experience of deja vu. Occasionally objects move around mysteriously around us. I think we got these faculties, we just need to reawaken them. Yes.
Coming back to consciousness itself a little bit here, the question is a simple one. It is, what do you think happens at the moment of human death?
Reminding me that I said that we're more than just flesh and blood.
Flesh and bone, yeah.
Flesh and bone, and you're curious to know what I think about what happened, about the moment of death,
Yep.
and about what happens to us after death, and if after death is the same place as before birth.
Yep.
Yeah? Yeah, I do absolutely believe that we are more than just flesh and bone. I think we are spirit. I think we are consciousness. I think we wear this body like a suit of clothes. I think it's this body is how we manifest consciousness in matter, and it's how we learn and experience from matter. We take material, we incarnate in material form, but I believe that the material form is secondary. It's a vehicle to allow us to navigate this physical three-dimensional world. And I think our fundamental essence is consciousness and spirit. Therefore, when the moment of death comes, consciousness is freed from matter and leaves the material body. Now, this is where we get into a series of intriguing mysteries. And some people find this idea objectionable. But I can't help feeling from my lengthy studies of ancient spirituality and from my own experiences in altered states of consciousness when I believe my consciousness has left my body, I can't help feeling that we are called to account for what we've done in this material incarnation. That that we're asked a question. You were given a gift. You were born in the precious gift of being born in a human body. What did you do with it? Did you use it well, or did you waste it away in sleep and hedonism and no pursuit of the real mystery of spirit, of why you're alive? Were you wicked, controlling, cruel? Did you deny the sovereignty of others? Or did you give the gift of love to others and help them to grow? The ancient Egyptians, I'll go into this in one of my talks, but the ancient Egyptians had a symbolic system that said we are asked those questions, and that in a way the whole purpose of our lives is to prepare ourselves for that journey that we make after death, and the account that we must give of the use we made of the gift of life. They definitely believed in reincarnation. Many Egyptologists will tell you that ancient Egypt did not believe in reincarnation, but there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that they did. However, it was possible to live a life so wicked, so cruel, so much in denial of spirit, that you wouldn't get the chance to reincarnate, that your story would end and you would not go on. And that is symbolized by Amit, the eater of the dead. And I'll show this in one of the talks that I give. But for many, the opportunity of rebirth came. The opportunity to come back, to correct mistakes made in previous incarnations, to learn lessons that we didn't learn before, and to move on. So I do think that the afterlife and the before birth are actually the same thing. And how long we spend in that place that the Tibetans called the between, the Bardo, and that the ancient Egyptians called the Duat, and what ordeals we must undergo there, and how exactly we must account for our lives. These are all elements of mystery. And of course, who knows? I mean, maybe none of that exists at all. Maybe the materialist scientists are right, and that we are just meat. But I don't think so. I think Richard Dawkins and others like him are going to have a terrible surprise when they pass beyond the veil. And they're going to discover that they've been shockingly misleading their fellow man and guiding us down a materialistic path, when really what we should be doing is attending to spirit, because that's what we're here to grow. We're here to grow ourselves as spirit.
Next question, and it is, what are your thoughts on resonance and on the reports of priests in the past singing the stones into place?
Priests singing the stones into place?
Singing the stones into place, yeah.
Robert Schock, when he was in Gobekli.
Yeah, I think resonance and the use of sound in ancient structures is a hugely neglected area of study. And actually, those Gobekli Tepe megaliths are really interesting because they stand on bedrock platforms, and they stand in little grooves in those platforms. They're not deeply buried in the platforms. It's almost as though they stood up by their own power, that there was some kind of resonance that kept them standing up, because now they can only be made to stand up either by burying them up to half their depth or by supporting them with poles. I don't believe that was the case in the past. I think that's a sign of a lost technology at Gobekli Tepe. As to the Great Pyramid, it's all about sound. It's very rare to have the opportunity to experience the Great Pyramid alone or with one or two others. But when you have the opportunity to do that, you immediately get its resonant qualities, which you don't get when you go in with a large group. And, for example, we have been in the King's Chamber when somebody has been toning in the subterranean chamber, 350, 400 feet below us through millions of tons of solid stone. You can hear them perfectly, clear as a bell, and the reverse is true as well. So, again, I think that in order to understand these structures, we need to widen our frame of reference beyond the simple material leverage principles of Newtonian physics. We need to get into a whole other realm of physics, and sound plays a very important part in that. And it also plays a very important part in visionary experiences. Any culture that explores vision, such as the tribes of the Amazon who work with ayahuasca, they all use sound as part of the ayahuasca journey. They sing these icaros, these songs that guide the spirit journey. It's evident even from the Stone Age that musical instruments were being used at an extremely early date. So I think sound plays a very important role. Yeah.
The next question here is one about Graham's recent travels, at least at the time. And I know before this trip to Peru, he was just recently in Turkey. And, the whole idea of Gobekli Tepe was a strong concept that he talked about in Magicians of the Gods. And the question is, you were recently in Turkey at Cappadocia and at Gobekli Tepe. Can you share your thoughts on those sites?
Okay, so the question is, you heard I was recently in Turkey, and you assume I went to both Cappadocia and Gobekli Tepe, and what are my thoughts? Yes, I was. Santha and I were in Turkey for 3 weeks. We spent 1 week there on our own, totally focused at Gobekli Tepe. And then we spent another week with a group rather like this, traveling right across Turkey. And then we spent the third week again by ourselves. The first week that we spent at Gobekli Tepe was absolutely a revelation for me. I've been aware of Gobekli Tepe for many years, but because I've been writing fiction recently, I never actually went there. I always felt a little bit guilty about this, but I was very busy doing other things. So finally we made the journey. We flew to Istanbul, and then we flew from Istanbul to a town called Şanlıurfa, which was called Urfa in ancient times. And from there it's a 25-minute drive to Gobekli Tepe, which is on the outskirts of Şanlıurfa. Gobekli Tepe means in Turkish pot-bellied hill, because there is that was the appearance of the original mound, which we now know to be totally man-made. Now it's interesting that Gobekli Tepe, the place it is a place which has a perfectly circular 360-degree horizon. You can see the entire horizon from Gobekli Tepe. You can see it from what would be the top of the pot-bellied hill, and you could have seen it exactly like that even before the pot-bellied hill was built. Whenever I encounter a perfect 360-degree horizon around an ancient site, that says astronomy to me. That says observing the rising and setting points of the celestial bodies. So that's one thing about Gobekli Tepe. Secondly, I was able to conduct a series of interviews with Klaus Schmidt, who is the German archaeologist he didn't find Gobekli Tepe, but he is the man who recognized it for what it is and excavated it. Gobekli Tepe was known about for some time. There were huge numbers of flints, worked flints lying on the surface, which were recognized as belonging to what is called the Upper Paleolithic, the Late Stone Age. And there were also some large chunks of hewn stone, cut stone, protruding above and lying on the surface. American archaeologists went there in the 1950s. They saw those cut stones, and they decided that they were so sophisticated that they must be recent. They thought that they were the work of the Byzantine period or even of the Ottoman Empire. And they weren't very interested in them, and they left them alone. Well, when Klaus Schmidt went there, he'd been doing work on other aspects of the junction between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, and he realized that those stones were much, much older, and that They were like cut stones from a place called Novali Chori, which is now underneath water as a result of a dam on the Euphrates River. And so he started to dig, and lo and behold, he discovered beneath the surface first one and then three more large megalithic stone circles. Now the mystery about these, and when I say large, you're looking at blocks of stone in situ which weigh up to 20 tons. And we later saw another block of stone in the quarry that was cut but fractured, which weighed more than 50 tons. The first thing about these standing stone circles is that they were deliberately buried. And this is why we can date them. The problem with most megalithic sites is that the carbon dating record has been messed up by many cultures going back and forward across them. But in the case of Gobekli Tepe, the carbon dating record is pristine. Bear in mind, you can't carbon date stone. The only way you can use carbon dating on a megalithic site is to find organic materials associated with the stone, preferably underneath the stone, and date that. Then you can say this stonework is at least that old. Maybe older, but it's at least that old. And based on the carbon dating of this pristine site, Klaus Schmidt realized that it was 12,000 years old, and that it had been used for 2,000 years and then buried, completely covered up, creating that pot-bellied hill, and abandoned. To me, this is a fantastic mystery. What we have around Gobekli Tepe is the historical origins of agriculture. That's where the very first true agricultural experiments take place. At the same time, the very first, as far as we know, true architectural experiments are taking place. I don't think they were the very first. I think Gobekli Tepe is the work of the survivors of a lost civilization. And I think it was a kind of think tank or academy for reseeding civilization, for equipping hunter-gatherers with the tools that they would need to move on to a higher level of civilization. It just comes out of nowhere. There has to be a very long background to the stonework that was done at Gobekli Tepe, and we don't find that background on the site. But interestingly, ground-penetrating radar has shown that if there are 4 circles above the ground right now, there are at least 20, perhaps as many as 50, still below the ground. And that all around Gobekli Tepe there are other as yet unexcavated sites from the same period. So I think there's a revelation about the past of humanity awaiting us there. We often talk about the Hall of Records. I think Gobekli Tepe could be the Hall of Records. I think that's why it was deliberately buried as a time capsule, to be found at a later date. And we are the ones who have found it, and it's our responsibility to decipher it and understand it. Now Cappadocia, come to you in a minute, Cappadocia has a different phenomenon. You have these things called the fairy chimneys, which are natural volcanic rock formations that have been cut out into residences, and you have underground cities like Derinkiyu, which go down 13 or 14 levels below the ground. Well, archaeologists call them underground cities, and they make the, to me, ludicrous suggestion that that they were built to flee invaders to that area. I must say, if I were fleeing an invader, the last place I would want to go is underground, since all they have to do is lock up my exit and I'm done for. I think that these so-called underground cities are not cities at all. I think their place is a vision quest. They're carefully constructed settings for visionary experiences. They're labyrinths, and they remind me very much of the Hypogeum at Malta. And then going on from Cappadocia, you come quite soon to Çatalhöyük, which is a very ancient Neolithic urban settlement. So I just think Turkey was a revelation to me. There's a huge amount of the human story waiting to be told there, and I think it's very exciting. And I understand Klaus Schmidt when he says that he's not planning to excavate more than another 2 or 3 of the circles, and he's going to leave the rest of them underground. But I disagree with him. I think the site is so important that we should excavate it all and really get to grips with what it means.
A follow-up question to the Gobekli Tepe topic. It is, what do you think about the carvings found at Gobekli Tepe? Specifically the therianthropic and animal-shaped carvings.
Yeah, there are many animals. You're asking me about the animal figures carved at Gobekli Tepe. There are many different kinds of animal figures carved at Gobekli Tepe. Some of them are quite recognizable, such as lions, or at any rate felines of some kind. Perhaps leopards, perhaps pumas, perhaps lions. Others are not recognizable. They're more like the kind of creatures, monstrous creatures that you see in vision. There are species of birds shown there, which are very difficult to... I mean, I've talked to quite a number of people about this, and many who are expert on animal life say they don't recognize these creatures. But Klaus Schmidt says they're all animals that lived in the Gobekli Tepe area 12,000 years ago. It's something that I intend to look into further. I'm going to try to specifically identify these species, some with huge jaws, with massive teeth in the jaws. Are they extinct species of animal? Are they attempts to render in three-dimensional visionary experiences? I'm not sure yet. But I think this was very interesting when we were at the Temple of the Moon in Cusco, up at Sacsayhuaman the other day, that there were two animals carved there. One of them is a serpent there were several serpents, but one serpent with a very large head, which at the doorway into the Temple of the Moon, which looked more like a sperm actually than a snake, and the other was a feline of some kind, a puma of some sort, that was carved there in the entranceway into the Temple of the Moon. Both of these creatures, that sperm-like serpent and the puma, are found in identical form at Gobekli Tepe. I mean, you couldn't tell them apart. They're absolutely identical. So, I think that there's a lot of intriguing further research to be done, and also into the possibility of connections between these different realms.
Another question here, I guess, musing on the concept and the daily life in the lost ancient civilization. And the question is, in ancient civilizations, did concepts like individual sovereignty, freedom, and consciousness need to be in harmony for these civilizations to prosper?
So you're saying, assuming the ancient lost global civilization was connected with higher consciousness, do I believe that it would have been a free civilization? Assuming that sovereignty and higher consciousness need to be in harmony with one another in order to be properly utilized. Yes, absolutely. I can't imagine a civilization which was focused around consciousnness that was not also focused around the sovereignty of the individual and individual freedom. I just can't imagine such a civilization. Now, it's interesting. If we look at ancient Egypt, there are some anomalies. Ancient Egypt was a centralized hierarchical state. It is not true to say that everyone in ancient Egypt was an initiate in the mysteries. There were many who were not, who did their daily work, who played their part in it. Many people think that ancient Egypt was a country that had slaves, but certainly in the Old Kingdom that is not true. There was no slavery in ancient Egypt in the Old Kingdom. When you come down much later to the New Kingdom, to the time of Ramesses II, there may have been some slavery, but in the Old Kingdom there was none. Many people say the pyramids were built by slaves. This is absolute nonsense. The pyramids were built by brilliant, free craftsmen who were exercising the ultimate of their art and ability. Slave labor could never have done such an incredible work of architecture. But I think it's true to say, as I said, that not everybody in ancient Egypt was on the consciousness quest. But there was an elect group who were supported by the rest of society. When Herodotus visited Egypt in the 4th or 5th century before Christ, he he described Egypt and the Egyptians as the happiest country and the happiest people that he had ever found anywhere in the world, that it was a land filled with joy and love. So they were doing something right, and their system, whatever it was, managed to survive for 3,000 years. 3,000 years in which there was an intense focused quest upon consciousness. But as I say, it was not for everyone, and it was as though some levels of society were there to support other levels of society in pushing that consciousness quest forward. I'm not saying that that's absolutely how it should be, but that's how it was in ancient Egypt. I think that the lost civilization, as I envisage it, is a civilization that was focused around consciousness at a much higher level, that had developed psychic and telekinetic and telepathic powers, that was pushing the envelope on what the human creature is capable of doing. But one of the interesting things is that even such an emancipated society can fall into a dark path. And many of the myths and traditions that we have about a global lost civilization indicate that happened. That the pursuit of the light was forgotten. That cruelty and arrogance prevailed. That the civilization fell out of harmony with the universe and incurred the anger of the gods, and as a result was punished by destruction. That's why I think the survivors did not immediately restart civilization. I think there was a feeling that a great error had been made, a fall from grace, and that it was necessary to go through a long process before civilization was started again. And I do think it was secret societies, initiatic cults, preserving the knowledge of the lost civilization that did eventually switch what we call civilization on again 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. But ultimately, we are here now, where we are today, in a society that is highly technologically competent, that has the capacity to meet every material challenge, although it fails to do so. I mentioned earlier, or when I was speaking the other day, the problem of global hunger and global starvation. Even though we have the means, we don't deliver on that. We don't end that problem, although we could. We don't stop cutting down the Amazon rainforest, and we allow a state of global warfare to prevail, and a state of hatred and fear and suspicion to prevail, even though we don't have to. I think that our society has pursued the material path too single-mindedly, and that to rebalance we need to find spirit again. We need to reconnect with spirit. And I think that as we look forward to the future, if we survive, we're going to have to understand the paramountcy of consciousness, and the fact that we are here to grow and develop as consciousness, as individual sovereign consciousnesses, and that we need to create a framework that nurtures and supports that. And we need to be very aware of the dangers and pitfalls of arrogance and pride. So in short, I think that consciousness is key, and I can envisage a society that was focused around consciousness. We would have to stop worshipping material things in the way that we do. They would have to be put in their place, useful, helpful in many ways, but not the focus of our lives. The production and the life of our society today focused on endless production and consumption, the huge pressures that are put on every individual to get by, to compete, to succeed, just to survive, leaves almost no room for contemplation of the mystery of being alive. And in the times when we have leisure, we're bombarded with the most ghastly TV, which is just pushing a hugely materialist message at us all the time, and we forget that really we're spiritual creatures here to grow as spirits, and that's what we need to recover. I think it happened in the past, I think it was lost, and I think our quest is to find it again.
The next topic here is one that I've also addressed and talked about in several videos, and the question is, where are the tools? Where is the evidence of technology in the human timeline that leads to a lost ancient high civilization?
I think that some of the steps on the way are fairly clear. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the record of the last 6 million years. Human beings, our ancestral humans, not anatomically modern humans, but ancestral humans, created the first stone tools, as far as we know, around 2.5 million years ago. They're very simple. It's called the Aldebaran tool tradition. They're extremely simple, and once they've been developed, they don't change them for the best part of 1 million years. They just carry on reproducing the same tool set, which tells us that ideas are being transmitted culturally, for sure, but it tells us that nobody is thinking outside the box or doing anything in the way of innovation. There is literally no innovation at all in human tool culture for 1 million years. And when a slight innovation, the Acheulean tool tradition, is introduced, that sticks for more than 1 million years as well, with very little innovation. So it's very true to say that in the first 2 million years or so of the human story, see, we go back again. I have to rely on the accepted picture, and when I say that, let's accept that the accepted picture could be wrong. But the last common ancestor with the chimpanzee is about 6 million years ago. So and that's when us, Homo, the genus Homo, starts to go its own way. 6 million years ago, down to 2.5 million years ago, there's no record at all of any creation of technology. Absolutely none. Except for some strange anomalies which are called out-of-place artifacts. Michael Cremo, a friend of mine, has written extensively about these in Forbidden Archaeology. But if we go with the mainstream picture, that's the view. 4 million years of zilch. Then the first stone tools, then 2 million years of zero innovation. And then we get, not when we become anatomically modern, not 195,000 years ago, the first glimmers of symbolic consciousness occur 110 to 90,000 years ago, when we get the first symbolic artifacts being produced. For example, shell bead necklaces. When our creature is making necklaces out of shell beads, adorning himself or herself, this is a symbolic statement. We can say that some kind of symbolism has dawned. But it's very sketchy until you get to about 40,000 years ago. And that's the time, as I've often said, when it seems that a light has been switched on in the human brain all over the world, and we get into an explosive episode of innovation, both technological. The tool sets become amazingly sophisticated. They're still stone and bone, but they're incredibly different from anything that's gone before. The hunting strategies, such as we can gather from the remains, become much more focused, much more organized, and most important of all, our ancestors start leaving definite evidence of huge symbolic art. They're making the most incredible art. You know, when Picasso came out of Lascaux and was interviewed by journalists in 1947, he was stunned. He'd just seen the cave paintings in Lascaux, and he said, you know, I thought we were doing new things today, but we've invented nothing. Those Stone Age artists they knew every trick that I can play, and they were playing those tricks on those cave walls. So it's an episode of incredible innovation, and that's why I focused on that episode in my book Supernatural, because I think it's the single most interesting story, single most interesting moment in the evolution of human behavior. This sudden emergence, it appears to be an emergence into consciousness, and that's why it's really fascinating that when you study the cave art in detail and look at the patterns and imagery that are being presented, you realize that these guys were taking psychedelics. These guys were eating mushrooms and consuming other psychedelic plants, and that the visions that they experienced in those altered states of consciousness were what they painted on the cave walls. This has now been most thoroughly investigated and explored, and it's the single most convincing explanation of cave art, that our ancestors stumbled across visionary plants, perhaps first sampling them as food items, and that it unleashed this storm of creativity, which really changed everything and set us on the path that we today are the end result of. And therefore it's ironic that our society demonizes and persecutes visionary agents, because we may be denying ourselves the next very important step in our own evolution. So I don't agree that there's no evidence of the steps on the way. I think there is evidence, and the whole business of working with metals, it really requires very sophisticated thought, and this was developed in a number of ancient cultures to quite a high level. So I think the evidence of the steps on the way is there, but for me the key thing is the faculty of human creativity and our ability to learn from visionary experience. And if there was ever a society that needed to learn from visionary experience, that's our society today. And I think it is precisely visionary experience that is playing its part in this reawakening of consciousness that we're all aware of in the world today, even though the powers that be seek to make those experiences illegal. So I think this is a very important lesson for us in the future. And let's not forget, the incredible explosive outburst of the 1960s. The amazing music, the computer revolution is born in that period in the 60s and 70s, again by people who were experimenting with visionary substances. So it's clear that these substances have an incredible part to play in the human story, and societies that are willing to nourish and embrace these experiences may record huge benefits from doing so. So I hope that answers your question in some way.
This question is kind of more on topic for the trip that we were on, specifically dealing with the architecture in Peru. And if anyone's interested in more detail on the different styles of architecture, I have a couple of videos on that topic. But this question for Graham was, in Peru, you can clearly see evidence for two styles of construction before the work of the Inca. Does this mean that there were two cataclysms?
The question is that we're seeing evidence of two advanced civilizations prior to the Incas. And does that suggest that there were two cataclysms which wiped out one and then successively later wiped out a second of these civilizations and left some kind of legacy that eventually flowered in the Inca culture? Well, first of all, of course, again, to pay tribute to Jesus Gamarra and his father Alfredo, and for recognizing, for seeing these very distinctive architectural styles which have been just ignored by archaeologists, and for raising the possibility that they reflect the work of different civilizations, perhaps connected in some way, but very different and succeeding one another in time. I'm still not convinced that the Earth has been on 3 different orbits around the sun in the last 100,000 years. But I have respect for Jesus and Alfredo Gamarra, and I will explore that possibility. Also, they're not the only people who've expressed that possibility, and there is new work into the cataclysmic nature of the universe that is considering such possibilities now. So I intend to subject that thesis that the changes in culture were a result of changes in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. I intend to subject that thesis to a rigorous examination in the coming year and to see if there's any merit in it or not. Right now, my instinct is I don't think it happened that way, but I'm not going to let that stand in the way of exploring it and see if it can be stood up. Oh my God. I think that we don't need to invoke, such dramatic changes as changes in the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, which have huge implications for the organization of the solar system and for the placement of other planets, to realize that there are many cataclysmic agents that we confront as a species. And I think that comets and asteroids are really key players in this story, and we know that they have played a key role in the human story, and we know that there was a gigantic comet impact 12,900 years ago. And we know already that the end of the last ice age was a cataclysmic series of events. The period between 21,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago was a period not just of one but of multiple cataclysms, of a succession of gigantic global floods, at least 3 occasions when sea level rose by as much as 30 feet virtually overnight. I mean, this is established in the geological record. There are certain corals that can only survive at 5 meters beneath the surface. If sea level increases in depth above them, those corals die. And by coral die-offs, it's possible to chart rapid rises in sea level. So we know that this was a very cataclysmic period, and I think that we may indeed be looking at a very complex story of not just one lost civilization, but 2 or 3 lost civilizations that were brought down in this cataclysmic episode, and that were survived, and that sought to rebuild civilization, and that venerated the works of their ancestors. And that's what we see with the enclosure of the most ancient works by the megalithic and cyclopean works, and subsequently much later into historical times with the Incas' attempts in their poorer architectural style to recognize and venerate the earlier work. So I think it's a very good hypothesis that there were more than one lost civilization. I think it's a very good hypothesis that cataclysmic changes were connected to that, but I'm not certain that it's simply a matter of changes in the orbit of the Earth.
Do you see a connection between the ancient American Serpent cults and the Vulture cults of ancient Europe?
Cults?
Yes.
Do you believe that was all from the same culture?
Yeah, I do. I think that when I look at the stories of Viracocha, when I look at the story of Quetzalcoatl, when I look at the story of Osiris, for example, when I look at the story of Manu, I'm looking at the story of civilizing heroes, of the survivors of a global cataclysm, who attempted to pass on something of the wisdom from the pre-flood times. You mentioned vulture cults.
There's vulture cults in Turkey.
Indeed, there is a huge vulture cult in Turkey. Yes.
In the age of Cappadocia was.
Çatalhöyük, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, very much so. And we were just recently in Çatalhöyük. That's right. Again, I think where you find the same symbolism being recycled all around the world, expressed in slightly different ways, you have to consider first the possibility of a remote common ancestor.
Were the original pharaohs of the vulture cult?
But of course, yes, the pharaoh wears a vulture on his headdress. Yes, vulture cult is very important in ancient Egypt.
Again, coming back to the consciousness topic, this question is, do you think that consciousness can manifest itself across time and space? And then, as a follow-up, what is consciousness?
Well, the idea that can consciousness manifest itself on different levels and different time periods, and hey, why not on different planets as well? Yeah, I think consciousness is the universal key. I think it's the heart of the matter. I think it's the essence of the matter. And again, I cannot claim to be reporting facts here, only telling you what I think. And what I think is that the material universe is a theater of experience in which consciousness may manifest and express itself. And I happen to believe that consciousness exists at all levels. A spider, a cockroach, a fruit fly, a flower, a tree, an antelope, a rabbit, a monkey, a man. We're all conscious. We're all conscious. The thing is that in the animal world we have the human species, men and women, have this amazingly sophisticated equipment that the universe is invested in giving us, called the human brain and the human body. And fruit flies don't have such sophisticated equipment. Their opportunity to make choices between right and wrong, to take responsibility for their behavior, are much less than ours are. and the opportunity to learn is there. But on the other hand, to be born as a fruit fly might also present challenges from which spirit can learn. And what a waste of this incredible universe it would be if there were not other worlds and other forms of intelligent life in which spirit could manifest. And of course, spirit manifests in dolphins and whales and other creatures on this planet, where it's all a process of the almost magical coming into being of spirit that we're witnessing here. And it can take many forms, and time is meaningless to spirit. Spirit says time is an artifact of the material realm. Once you're outside matter, you're outside time and space. So I think consciousness can endlessly manifest in all manner of imaginable worlds. Yeah, the idea that time is linear is another artifact of the three-dimensional realm, and that time may well be circular, may well be a cat's cradle of spiraling, interconnected lines, and that there may be connections between different epochs which powerfully manifest. And then the whole notion of reincarnation as well, that we come back, that we get a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. It was Voltaire who said, it's no more absurd to be born twice than to be born once. To be born once is an incredibly crazy thing to happen, and just to live. I mean, this is the thing that our society tries very hard to stop us doing, to just think about the incredible mystery of being alive at all, of living day-to-day life, of being in this universe and in this world. It's a huge mystery. We don't know what we're doing here. We really don't know. We don't have a clue. There are all kinds of theories. Some people say it's God. Some people say it's just the random interaction of chemical molecules. Some people say it has meaning. Some people say it doesn't. But nobody really knows. So that's the nature of the game, that we come into this world, we come into physical manifestation in order to figure it out. And a society that acts to prevent us from figuring things out, that tells us that it's got all the answers, that we don't need to do any thinking, such a society is not only stupid, it's wicked. It's denying the very purpose of existence, in my view.
A similar question to around the Peruvian architecture. The question is, where is the lost ancient high technology that is used in Egypt and here in Peru?
Where is the lost ancient technology that would be responsible for the pyramids and for some of the work here? I think the problem is, again, a problem of reference frame, that we're looking for our kind of technology. That's what we're looking for when we look back in the past, and we don't see a lot of evidence for that. The kind of technology that our society has manifested in the past 8 to 10,000 years is a slow process. I think we have to entertain the possibility that the technologies that were used in the construction of the Great Pyramid, the technologies that were used those walls at Sacsayhuaman, my goodness, if you just stand there and look at them with an open mind, they're almost unbelievable. These gigantic cyclopean blocks, I don't know. Some of them have got to be in the range of 200 tons plus. They're just monstrous blocks of stone. And then not only have they been brought there and put into place, but then they've been built up into this gigantic jigsaw puzzle, which, it's like somebody said, how can I make something just as difficult for myself as it's possible to make it? And then actually went ahead and did it perfectly, just perfectly. Well, when we try to look at how that's done with our technology, it's difficult to see how it could be done. I've seen many mundane and boring attempts by mainstream scientists to explain how Sacsayhuaman was done, but I must say it's not been in any way convincing to me. I think I have no doubt that we're looking at a gigantic technological achievement in Sacsayhuaman, but I think my instinct is it's a technology totally unlike our own, not based on mechanical advantage, not based on machine tools. I think we have to look back into we have to consider the possibility of psychic technologies, of the power of the human mind being harnessed to influence matter in ways that we are not even allowed to imagine today, because that peer review process refuses to consider such a possibility could even ever happen. And yet, I haven't been to Coral Castle yet, but I understand that some pretty extraordinary things were done there by Edlis Kalnin, and don't appear to have been done using our principles of science. So, you know, we have a mystery here, and I don't think we'll solve that mystery by trying to explain it in terms of our technology.
This next question is a good one because mushrooms are a really interesting species, just trying to understand what they are and where they possibly originated from. It's a simple question. It is, where and how do you think that mushrooms first came to Earth?
Mushrooms, yes. the alien ambassadors.
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so he's asking, assuming that psychedelic mushrooms played a role in the emergence of human consciousness, when and how do we think that mushrooms first came to Earth? You know, that raises an interesting thought in my mind, because it's very clear that that great innovative outburst of 40,000 years ago or less is linked to the consumption of psychedelics. But one has to wonder why our ancestors who were hunter-gatherers hadn't discovered psychedelics before. Why did they only begin to sample psilocybin mushrooms 40,000 years ago? Surely they must have been able to pick those cute little mushrooms up 100,000 years ago. So this, I mean, it does raise the question. Maybe these amazing agents are some kind of relatively recent import into the ecology of the Earth. I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer is. The idea that spores are migrating through the universe is a very attractive idea. It was the idea that both Fred Hoyle and Francis Crick considered with their various forms of panspermia ideas, and maybe these intelligence enhancing agents are indeed coming to us from outside. I just don't know. The more DNA work needs to be done. We were discussing this earlier. I mean, the idea that to explore the diaspora of psychedelic mushrooms all around the world, the relationship between Psilocybe cubensis in Cambodia and Psilocybe cubensis in Ecuador, the fact that these species look rather different from one another. Are they different in their effects? Let's go back down the DNA trail and see where the common source is, and see where these things come from. I think that would be an excellent inquiry. It's precisely the kind of inquiry that modern mainstream science would completely reject as pointless. But to me, it's an inquiry that could bear, you know, incredible fruit. These are very mysterious agents. The way that, whether it's DMT or whether it's psilocybin, whether it's mescaline, the way that these agents interact with the human brain and bring out all kinds of questions within us is a hugely important part of the human story, and we need to get to the origins of it. Yeah.
Another question here, going back to the topic of secret societies. Simple one for Graham. It is, have you been approached by, or would you consider joining the Freemasons?
I've had a lot of contact with Freemasons. Every now and then I get... Of course, Freemasons are not a secret society. They're a society with secrets. And there is a difference. Every now and then somebody accuses me on the internet of being a Freemason. It always makes me laugh, because... First of all, I don't find the I don't find the thought that I might be a Freemason offensive. I know lots of Freemasons, and they're very open-minded people, and they're inquiring into mystery, in my view. And I don't think they're part of some grand global conspiracy. I have spoken at Masonic lodges, and quite a number of Masons have said to me, "Why don't I become a Freemason?" And my answer is always the same. I'm an author. My job is to explore extraordinary possibilities, and to do so with as independent a spirit as possible. It's not appropriate for me to belong to any organization. I have to stay outside organizations. I can have friendships with many different kinds of people. I can respect their paths of inquiry, but I don't have to belong to them. So I would never join any society or organization simply because it would contradict what I regard as my purpose as a writer. Even if they would grant me access to the mysteries of the universe, I would not join them. I would rather figure out those mysteries for myself. That's what I think I'm here to do in this incarnation. Maybe in another incarnation I might play the game differently, but in this one I'm here not to join anything. Yeah. Thank you.
And now the last question, one that I think is excellent, and I'm sure Graham has a great opinion on this. It's a simple question. It is, how does one achieve happiness in this life?
How does one achieve happiness in this life?
How does one achieve happiness in this life?
Yeah.
Well, that is not a boring question. That is no need to fear that that's a boring question. That's a very exciting question, and that, along with the question of what happens to us after we die, is a question that everybody on this bus has asked themselves at one point or another. And as Santa's saying, what is happiness actually? What is happiness? I don't think that there's a single one-stop answer to that question, and I think it may be different for every person. I mean, first of all, the prospect of death can seem quite threatening, and it looms over us. And believe me, at the age of 63, it looms over us a lot more strongly than it does at the age of 23. And you begin to wonder what the whole purpose of this has been about. It can cause great unhappiness, the prospect of death. I don't believe it should. I personally regard death as the beginning of the next great adventure. I don't think I fear it. I don't welcome it. I don't want it to hurry along. I want to live out this incarnation and do the very best that I can with it. But I don't think death is something to fear. I think it's part. I'm coming to the question. Santa's telling me that I'm going off track, but I'm verbose. Once you start me on something, I can't stop. I go off in many different directions. I'm simply saying that the fear of death is something that causes many people to be unhappy. Happiness is when you're being understood. That's a good one. I would say, out of all the possibilities, true happiness comes from giving love. I think that's the one thing that's within our control. If you act with love towards fellow human beings, consciously, even though it's difficult, you're more likely to be happy than if you act with suspicion and fear and doubt, and that if you give other people a hard time all the time, all of this, you may be making them unhappy, but fundamentally you're making yourself unhappy. So I think that, as Bill Hicks said, it's a choice between love and fear. And if we choose love and make that the central mission in our lives, we are likely to find happiness as a result of it. Not because we calculatedly seek it, but because that's the outcome of behaving in a loving way. Actually, I'm not sure I've got more to say to it than that. It's a great mystery. What I'm saying is, giving love brings happiness. Yeah, and that those who, and I have observed that those who give love, who give again and again love, actually are happy people. Santa's happy. and that those who don't give love, the less they give love, the more unhappy they are. And love is doing. Love is not words. Love is not really even an emotion. Love is doing. It is acting in the best interests of another, even if that may not be what suits you at the time, and it may be difficult to do. But that is what love is.
Less in a philosophical sense, but more in like your own journey, your own experience in life, following your own path.
My own experience in life tells me that the more I can give love, the happier I am.
Okay.
I come back to that, and nothing else. No material things, no possession makes me happy. No amount of money makes me happy. I have to say, being in debt definitely made me unhappy. I went through a long period of my life when I was stony broke, and constantly had to account to myself for myself to others. That was very unhappy experience. It's nice to be okay off, you know, to be able to function in daily life. But I don't think material things bring happiness. I think fundamentally it is love.
Okay.
That's all there is. Love is all there is. And on that note, let's pause and rest for the rest of the journey. I'm so sorry that I bonked you on the head with the microphone. You'll carry the scar.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that Q&A with Graham Hancock. I have been swapping emails with him recently. As the time of recording this particular piece, it is late in 2020. I know he's embarked on another research trip around the world, but I will have him on my podcast at some point. We will have a discussion. I'm very much looking forward to the chance to do that. As always, you can see all of my work on my website at UnchartedX.com and, of course, on my YouTube channel where all of my videos are located. If you're interested in supporting the podcast via the value for value model, you can find out all of the ways to do that at UnchartedX.com/support. Thanks to everybody who does support the channel, all of my patrons and supporters and subscribers out there. I will see you all in the next one. Cheers.